So this perspective of worldview has been incredibly helpful to me to move our understanding away from just looking at the word of faith as a certain key, set of doctrines or just a certain kind of practices like sowing and reaping, a positive confession and all that. But instead that this is a complete worldview. It is a lens that people look at the whole of reality through. And the basic understanding of worldview, I take this from James Sir, who was a very known worldview scholar, and he defines worldview as the fundamental perspective from which one addresses every issue of life. So why this is so important to us is because a worldview is, first of all, transparent. You cannot know that you are in a worldview when you're in it. That's the kind of key understanding here, is that when I was in the Word of Faith, I didn't know that Word of Faith was a worldview. It just is. It was just reality until it cracks. A crack will make a worldview visible. It's the same if you get a crack in your glasses or a crack in your, front windshield in your car or whatever. That's when you start to realize it's there, right? So I was in this worldview of the Word of Faith, but I just didn't know it until I got some cracks in it. And I've realized that people who start to realize that things are not really as they seem in the Word of Faith, they have had cracks in their worldview. And when that happens, it's really disturbing, because it's not just a theological system that gets a crack, it's all of reality. It's like your whole universe somehow gets cracked. But the thing that first of all cracked it for me, in a sense, that made me realize that this is a worldview, and this worldview is not really as good as I thought it was theology. For me, it was theology. It was when I got into more of the Greek, New Testament Greek, and I just got deeper and deeper into the biblical texts. And I realized that things that I've been taught and things that my spiritual fathers at the time said that they were given by revelation knowledge didn't really fit the original text of the New Testament. And that cracked it for me. I mean, it really, really did. I had to stop and ask myself, if this teaching that claims to be the teaching of the New Testament revived, that claims to be the word movement, that takes the Bible most seriously than any other Christian movement. If it doesn't fit the original Greek text, what are we going to do about it? I mean, how can this be true, right? So I would say the theology for me was the first thing that cracked the worldview and made it visible. And the moment the worldview becomes visible, it's also the moment you can start to critically analyze it. And you can start to look at it and see, hey, what's going on here? Is this a worldview that I really want? Is this a worldview that is really helpful? So yeah, theology was the thing that cracked it for me. Another thing that often cracks the Word of Faith worldview I've seen is the leadership, the Word of Faith leadership. And what I'm saying here is not that every leader has issues and problems, but there is a certain kind of leadership structure in the Word of Faith. There's a certain kind of way of exercising leadership authority in the Word of Faith that often even cracks their own worldview for other people. For example, this is what happened to my wife. Her hero in the Word of Faith movement, right? She looked up to this pastor so much in what some people call the honor code and all. I mean, whatever, this close relationship to the leader that you develop in the Word of Faith, where your faith in God is somehow also linked to your trust and your commitment to your Word of Faith strongman. So she was following this pastor, and at one time she had a honest question about just something, of a Christian practice. Should we do this or should we not? And so she wrote him an email, and he didn't reply to the email. But one day after church, she encounters this pastor in the corridor outside the sanctuary, and the pastor stops her, and she's just in her early 20s, and he gives her a scolding. He is upset. He's angry that she has even asked this question. Why did she even quote scripture, at him in a sense? And she went home and she was devastated, because when her relationship with the pastor was not right, automatically her relationship with God was not right. Because her pastor was upset with her meant that God was upset with her. So that threw her in a big, circle or cycle, rather, of shame and guilt and just, a real, very difficult time. But at the same time, that was the thing that cracked her worldview, because she started to wonder, hey, if my pastor reacted so harshly to an honest question, I just asked about the Bible and how some scriptures seem to contradict what we are doing. Why did he act that way? So the pastor's reaction actually helped to crack the worldview for her, and she started to see that there might be other ways that you can be a Christian leader that actually might be better. And there might be other Christian leadership kind of teachings and principles of Christian leadership which are more Christ-like than in the Word of Faith. So leaders, sometimes, ironically enough, are the ones who crack the worldview that they promote. So I was in a service once that also helped to crack my worldview, apart from theology. So I was in this mega church. I was part of it for a number of years and serving faithfully there. And one day, this church is going to do a big fundraising to build a massive sanctuary. So they have planned this Sunday service for a long time, where people going to save up money and then, give it to the building fund. And all that is fine and good. I mean, churches need to fundraise. I'm not against that. And every church does, even those within the Word of Faith and outside, they fundraise, right? So that's nothing wrong with that. But so the service goes on, and there are thousands and thousands of people in this service. And then finally, there's two elderly women who walk up, and they are poor, and you can see it on their countenance that they are really struggling in life financially. And they come with a few coins, and they are going to put them on the altar together with everybody else. But the moment the senior pastor is up on the stage, he noticed that they are going to put coins there. He takes the mic and he shouts, "No coins, only paper money. Go back." So the older ladies had to take their coins and turn around in front of these thousands of people and go back and sit down. Man, when I saw that, I was deep in the Word of Faith worldview. It had not yet fully cracked for me, but this was one thing that added to the crack. I was like, how could this happen? And we even have Jesus' story of Jesus and the widow's offering. And here the pastor acts this way. How can this be Christ-like? How can this be the Word? So there is this amount of fear and control in the Word of Faith leadership style very often. And that sometimes also helps, in a sense, to crack the worldview, because people at some point start to realize that this is not healthy. There's something going on here which is not biblical. It's not Christ-like. And starting to question the leadership style or the way power is handled, the way authority is handled, can also then lead to start to question the theology behind it. Because many people, to be honest, don't spend that much time thinking about the theology, but they see how it's lived out in practice, and often in terms of how leadership is handled. So many times people start with leadership, and after questioning leadership, they start to say, hey, what kind of theology, what kind of Bible interpretation can empower and justify these kinds of actions of the pastor and the leader? And that also then helps to see the worldview more clearly and start to have a sound and critical distance to it. Life itself can crack the worldview. A worldview, by definition, a sound worldview, is a perspective on life that does justice to all of life's experiences and realities. The problem with the Word of Faith worldview is that it doesn't have a category for suffering. And this is a huge critique of the Word of Faith worldview, that it just can't handle suffering. It just has one answer, and that is lack of faith if you suffer. and or attack of the devil, but at some point you will overcome that through faith, right? But it doesn't have a way of handling the complexities of human life. And when I say human life, some people think that is kind of a liberal argument or whatever, but they don't even have the categories to handle the biblical texts. What about the book of Job? What about the suffering of Paul, for example? It's very difficult for a Word of Faith person in the Word of Faith worldview to even kind of handle the biblical materials. So we just streamline the Bible to fit our worldview in a sense. But so life itself can very often crack the Word of Faith worldview because people go through suffering. And when they go through suffering, the Word of Faith worldview will turn against you because it can be a friend when things are going well, when opportunities are there, when life is just smooth and sweet, right? The Word of Faith worldview will give you energy. It will just, give you just new oxygen in a sense. And this is the positive side of Word of Faith as well, is that it really energizes people. But the problem is when you come to the other side of the coin, where you're going through suffering, when you don't get an answer to prayer, when you're struggling financially, when you're struggling with sickness or, mental, kind of depression or something, the Word of Faith worldview will turn on you and you will start to encounter the darkness of it. Because what happens is, in the words of somebody I know who went through a hardship in the Word of Faith, and he says, when I got into struggling, there was not a merciful God on the other side of my prayers. In fact, it was a God who said, use your faith. And this is the side of the Word of Faith worldview that often cracks it for us. Hardship in life, suffering, because all of us will go through it, right? And a worldview that does not give us resources, that does not empower us to handle suffering, is not a worldview worth holding fast to. Because the biblical worldview, the biblical story will give you the tools. It will give you the power. It will empower you to face suffering through Jesus, right? And in the power of the Spirit. But this is where, for many, the Word of Faith worldview cracks. One aspect of the Word of Faith worldview is that it tries to press all human experiences into its own mold. So instead of empowering us to handle all these different shades of experiences that we have in life, it forces our experiences of things to be streamlined according to the worldview. And it reminds me about a kind of funny statement I heard when I was in the military. And one day the officer told us, he says, if you see a difference between the map and reality, follow the map. To me, that is much in the Word of Faith worldview that follows the same logic. That if your experiences of things don't fit the worldview, follow the worldview. Because just deny the experiences you're feeling. Deny your human emotions. Because you are a spirit being, right? You have a soul and you live in a body. So you tell your feelings what to feel. You tell your body how to behave. Because you are a spirit that rules your body and your soul. I'm not going to get into the problems with this, right? I just mentioned it, that's not a biblical anthropology. It's not a biblical way of looking at human beings. The Bible portrays us in a unified fashion. We are body. We are soul and spirit also. We are all of that. We are a holistic being in a sense. Some people might think that holistic sounds new agey, and I don't mean it that way at all. I mean it in a biblical sense. So anyway, I'll need to speak to that in another place. But just to emphasize here that the moment the Word of Faith worldview differs from reality, it will push reality to try to fit its worldview. And that makes people deny reality. And sadly, I've encountered this even as late as this year, the people who have been struggling with severe sicknesses and lethal, sicknesses have tried at some point to deny them, thinking that if I just kind of push on with this worldview, it will deliver for me, and it didn't. And this is very sad. So this is something that cracks the worldview, is the reality of life that don't fit the worldview itself. And that's when the worldview's power kind of rises up and tries to shape the reality to its own mold. And that is just not healthy. I need to add a comment here, because when I'm saying that the worldview and reality can be opposing, and that the Word of Faith worldview pushes reality into its own mold. Sometimes the biblical story also seems to contradict our human experience. So at that point, there is a sometimes where we need to hold the biblical truth higher than what we at present just experience, and we have to trust God. So I'm not saying that always we just follow our human experience and any theology have to fit and be shaped according to our human experience. That's not really what I'm saying, and I hope that you get the point. So theology, leadership, and life, those are the three main things I have seen that really cracks the Word of Faith worldview for people. And the moment you have a worldview crack, it shapes, like I said, it shakes you to the foundation of your being. And it can be a very, very difficult time. But it's also a very healthy time, because it's healthy in the sense it's a opportunity for growth, where you can identify your worldview and you can start to work on it, because now finally the worldview has become visible to you. What has been transparent is now visible, and you can actually start to analyze your worldview. You can capture it and start to wonder, is this really, or start to ask, is this really a worldview that I want? Is this really a worldview that is biblical? So even though it can be very painful, you should welcome it, because it is an opportunity for growth. Theology, leadership, and life are the three main things I have seen that cracks the Word of Faith worldview for people. What have you found? I would love to hear your experiences. You can use the comments here below here on YouTube, or you can reach me on social media or email, liberatingfaith@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And till I see you in the next video, God bless you.